One weekend afternoon, my sister and I went to check out some antique shops in the next town over. The second shop was kind of big, with maze like aisles you walked through, so my sister and I ended up getting separated. Anyone who's visited antique shops knows what I'm talking about. The doorless three-walled rooms that display usually a mock setup of a room to sell furniture or clothes sometimes. Well, this one featured paintings along all the walls. I don't remember much of the other paintings except some in the back. Get to those in a minute. And this very specific pig painting. Even now, I can't seem to forget it. For starters, pigs are one of my favourite animals, so I guess that makes sense why I noticed this painting so much. I can't even describe it pretty well. It was big, maybe 3 foot perhaps, and really pink. Even the background was kind of pinkish, and it featured a pink pig wearing a flowered hat. The eyes of the painting were kind of creepy. Just straight black, but with a little bit of lashes, but no colour to them. Just black. I found the painting honestly rather cute. But I realised as I looked at the painting, I was getting a very bad feeling coming from that room. And keep in mind, I hadn't even entered it yet. It was like not just a creepy feeling, but a feeling of overwhelmingly something bad. I noticed there were some old 40s posters from a Chicago play that I wanted to look at, but they were all the way in the back of that room. Finally, I toughened up and went inside the room anyway to look at the posters. My bad feeling increased by tenfold when I was in the centre, and I turned and looked to eye with that pig. I did look at the Chicago poster, but I definitely didn't look long. The feeling was bad, but not bad enough to keep me totally out, but bad enough to keep me from staying long. I didn't mention this to anyone in the shop, including my sister. Later on in the drive home, my sister mentioned getting a bad feeling from the room with the pig painting. I then told her I felt the same thing. The feeling we got, I think anyways, came from something in the room itself. I don't think it came from the pig painting, though we can't seem to forget it. I think something in the room was mad about having one of its possessions on sale. This occurrence happened a few months ago. After me and two friends, I'll refer them to as A and J, we were driving back from a Dodgers game back to our house in Murrieta, California. Along the way, we missed an exit and got lost around San Dimas, and took this opportunity to pull off and get McDonald's. After we got back into our car, and the GPS started us back on our course. This time, however, through some surface streets to an on-ramp. It was at about 2 and there were no cars, which we thought was normal considering the time. As we kept driving, we still hadn't seen any cars, even while on this freeway, which we still don't know where it is. And we never saw any until we ended up in Corona. But as we were just talking tonight, Jay and I realised that there were some weird occurrences that happened on that road that are like seriously fucking me up. First off, I'd like to mention that A and myself both agree and remember these events with no parts missing from both of our recounts. First off, while on that road, none of us remember any lane going in the other direction. We both also remember us being driving on a single lane road. Second, it was pitch black with no surrounding other than a drop off to our left and a hill to our right. And thirdly, we kept seeing freeway ends here signs over and over again until we remember being in Corona. But perhaps the scariest thing that myself and A both recall is that Jay was never there that entire duration. Regardless, this is freaking me out and I need to know if I ended up in the Twilight Zone. If anyone has any information, please respond. My 4-year-old son says a skeleton in my closet looks at him and says he doesn't know who he is. He won't anymore though. Apparently he's left this realm. Since he could talk, my son was talking about seeing a monster saying goodnight tonight, when this was daily for 2 years. And as his speech improved, the monster became a skeleton in Mommy's closet. I didn't think much of this, but then my second child was born, and when she was 9 months old, I woke up to her sitting up in our bed, smiling and waving at the closet where Jack says there's a skeleton. That was it for me. I decided to call a medium the next day to professionally cleanse our house. As soon as she entered my house, I started to shiver. I'm an amateur hippie, but this lady had energy. She seemed a little crazy, but also legit. She was a corporate banker and almost died 12 years ago from MRSA, and used to see ghosts as a kid, and when she came to, she could see spirits everywhere, and someone told her she had work to do, so she started doing this as a side job and also teaches cooking. She came in and set up, looked behind her, and touched a painting on the wall, and told me my grandma was with us, and that my grandma said to me not to worry, she is here. And she was always here to protect my kids. But that specific painting is a watercolour of my grandmother's house, and she did a fucking dead-on impression of my grandmother's raspy smoker's voice, and it gave me chills. So we walked around my house and saged it, and she told me that what info she was picking up from the energy. Occasionally, she would talk back to the spirits. I know it sounds nuts, but she was genuine. The sage went out as we went into the original dirt floor basement. She didn't blow it out. She said to me, "They are saying I can't control them." I immediately see my entire life flash in front of my eyes because we're obviously getting ghost murdered. She asked me to go get the lighter upstairs. Then she relit the sage and had a reaction to the creepy-ass corner of the basement, confirming all my childhood fears. She kept interjecting with things my grandma was saying to her and copying my grandma's sass and voice. She never knew my grandma. After the basement, she changed from plural ghosts to ghost and said this one was lingering and being difficult. We went up to the room with the skeleton closet, and she said the spirit was a low vibration, so she couldn't see a visual, but she could hear him. And he said she couldn't make him leave. So she called on her archangel guardian guy and asked him to help pull the spirit to where he belongs. The sage started to go out upstairs, and she said this spirit was being pulled, and guys, the sage went out, and my fucking phone rang. It was my husband, who didn't know I had this woman coming over. She laughed. I didn't. So then we went back to her crystal and candle setup, and she said another prayer, and she said now that he has crossed over, she would get more info from him. She proceeded to use a lot of Old English words. She said he was a British sailor in the 1600s, and he didn't do any fighting, but a lot of drinking, and he was locked up to dry out and got an infection on his wrist from the handcuffs, and they tried to cut the infection off and he bled out, and they left him not 6 feet under. She asked him why he was attached to my son, and she said he laughed and said he was a funny boy. And she said my grandma said to her that she followed the spirit around so that he didn't hurt my kids. And that my grandma says, "I'm not going anywhere." And that my grandma is a sassy lady. I'm okay with that though. We did a lot of research on the house at Town Hall and the museum, but all the history is from the 1800s and beyond, and mostly about the main family that built it lived here. I can't find anything about my neighbourhood in the 1600s, but would love to find out if it was like a camp of British soldiers or something. It's fascinating. Who knows if it's for real, but I will tell you that Jack talked about this skeleton for a good 18 months, multiple times a week. And since the lady came over, Jack hasn't brought up seeing him. He heard a noise once from outside and asked me if that was his skeleton friend, but that's it. Back in middle school, I had a friend, let's call her Anne. Anne lived in a nice house, way nicer than my small apartment, so we spent the night there. There were many stories about Anne's house our other friends had told me, but I didn't pay much mind. Truthfully, I thought they were just trying to scare me. A few monster energy drinks later, it was just Anne and I sitting up in her room. It's about 3 a.m, but that was normal for us in middle school. We were talking when we heard something from the kitchen. At first it was just small noises, clink here, a clatter there. Anne and I looked at each other confused. Her mom was asleep in her room down the hall. The dog was in there too. And her dad worked the graveyard shift, so he wasn't even home. We then heard a deep, bellowing laugh. It was loud. It sounded like Andre the Giant just laughed in the kitchen. Anne and I are both now terrified. Then all the pots in the kitchen start clanging together. Anne and I book it to her mom's room and try to tell her what's happening. She says we're just tired and to go to bed. We decided it was best to sleep in her mom's bed with her. The moment we decided, the dog starts to go ballistic. She's scratching at the door and barking like crazy. So her mom takes the dog outside through the sliding glass door in her room. The dog is still barking, but just through the glass. Next thing I know, I'm laying in bed praying to God. I said the Our Father more times than I can remember, and I'm not even that religious. It just was the only thing I could think of. Then we felt someone or something touch our legs. We were both frozen with fear. We had our heads under the comforters, crying. Once we felt it, we both decided to look up. We could see the imprints on the comforter as it moved up. It was so slow, yet happened so fast. I can still feel it on my legs to this day. We both managed to pass out, probably from pure fear. When we woke up the next morning, I texted my mom to come get me immediately. As we waited for my mom to pick me up, we ate some breakfast. I was drinking water out of this particular glass. It was a glass, but it had a metal handle that wrapped around the glass. You can take the glass out from the metal frame by pulling the glass up and out. But the shape of the glass didn't allow it to fall out of the bottom of the metal frame, obviously. All of us were standing in the kitchen, including her dad, and you just see the glass I'm holding just pop out from the top and smash onto the floor. Someone would have had to push it from the bottom. We all stared at that cup for a good 30 seconds before we realised we should probably clean up the glass. After the glass broke, her mom blessed the house. I never slept over again, and Anne liked to pretend it never happened. This happened 2 years ago at the end of summer. We had been swimming in the park and had wound up on a very desolate trail. There was one there, but just faintly. This area gets traffic because of the ruins of an old cabin that settlers built ages ago, but no one ever goes up the hill as it is very steep. My friend James has been there before, and he said it was very spooky when he went, so we thought that it sounded fun. We hiked for about 10 minutes from the ruins of the cabin to where James said the cemetery was. Now, we had just swam, so I was wearing river shoes and a bathing suit, and they were wearing the same, so not really for this kind of terrain. We eventually got up the hill, and the thick brush instantly led into a bald spot. If you don't know what a bald is, it's basically a part in deep wood that has no trees growing on it. They're landmarks hikers usually go to. The cemetery was small, maybe about 15 tombstones, and many smaller ones claimed by the woods on the side. Many graves were marked a year like they just said 1804 or 1799, things like that. There was only one name eligible on any of them, and it was for a 4-year-old named Isabel. On one grave, the one in the dead centre, there was an old copper picture frame, and I mean real old. It was heavy to pick up and had numerous scratches and chips in it, but wasn't faded or green. In the frame, there were bits of broken glass and a black and white photograph long since faded away. Now I don't know why I did what I did next, but I couldn't stop myself once I started. I picked it up to have a better look at it. As soon as I did, all the usual summer sounds of the woods, cicadas and bird calls, just stopped. It was so noticeable that both my friends looked worried and looked at me. Great, thanks. Now we're cursed, is all I heard, and still hear from time to time. Over the next couple minutes, we nervously joked and looked around the spot, but it started getting dark, really dark. It was only around 3 or 4 in the afternoon, so this greatly worried us. We decided to leave and headed back down the trail. Every now and then, we would hear the groan of an old tree and the snapping of a branch. It was enough to get us moving faster, and I swear out of the corner of my eye, I saw something in the tree. I started to nope out of there when James, who was in front of us, just stopped. We could see the road through a clearing of trees up ahead, as we were right at the ruins of the cabin. He looked to the side of us and turned white. James didn't scare easily. In the 10+ years I'd known him, if I only saw him scared twice. Once when we were hiding from people on private property, and once when we got stuck caving, so seeing him scared freaked me out. The next thing I know, he bolted and we followed closely, just running out of the trees. We hit the gravel road, covered with scrapes and bruises from running through bush, and he rushed us along. As we got closer to our cars from the woods, the sky started to get lighter, and by the time we got back, it looked like it was 4 in the afternoon and not 8 or 9. I've asked James what he saw, but he's been very nervous about it. All I know is I felt watched and didn't want to go back there. I did, however, mainly because I'm stupid. We went back for Halloween last year and more things happened, but not nearly as bad as last time. It was summer and I had just turned 13. In the summer, my mum would take my sister and I to a part of the park nearby that had a fairly good-sized river in it. This place is fairly well known and hosts a lot of picnics and wedding shoots. The place that most of this happens at is a place with a lot of rapids and little waterfalls. It truly is beautiful and one of my favourite places to swim. Back then, however, it was an off-limits swimming area per my mom. You see, this part of the river, mainly the 8-foot waterfall, had a track record for deaths. At the base of the waterfall there's a whirlpool that pulls you about 8 to 10 feet depending on the water level. The fact that it was off limits made it irresistible to me. I would ask time and time again if I could swim there, and usually it was a resounding no. But on this day, we ran into my mama and aunts here and my mom was occupied. So when I asked her, she said, yeah, sure, as a way to brush me off. I went to the waterfalls, which were just a short walk from our current area, and jumped in. Instantly, I loved it. It was as deep, if not more, than our current spot and hosted a couple of natural water slides. I was having a lot of fun, but I noticed the waterfall. For some reason, my teenage mind thought the best course of action was to climb up it and jump back in, so I began the ascent. As I climbed, I started thinking it was a bad idea and decided to climb back down. But I grabbed a very loose rock and I came tumbling down with the rock in tow. I fell into the whirlpool and it took me down to the bottom of the then 6-foot drop. The rock landed on my foot and crushed it. It was about the size of a cat. I was of course freaking out and splashing about. By straining my legs, I was able to get my mouth to the surface and scream for help, but there was no one around and the sounds of the waterfall drowned me out. I started to pray and beg to be saved. After a minute of that, I looked up on the top of the waterfall and saw someone standing there. I could still see them as clearly as it was yesterday. They wore all black clothes and had blonde hair. I screamed for help and they smirked. This put 2 things into my mind: fear and determination. I went underwater and pulled the rock up enough for me to painfully pull my foot out of it and swam against the current to the shore. And the person was nowhere to be seen. It had only been seconds ago, so there was no way they got out of my line of vision. I limped back to my mom, who of course yelled at me for going there. I ended up just having a scraped up foot and sprained ankle. I told my pastor about it, and he said it was a demon, but so is everything here. I told some of my more religiously free peers, and they told me it could have been death. I don't really know. Since then, I've nearly gotten myself killed a couple more times, even been in the hospital for it, but never seen him again. My views on death and life itself have changed. I'm more understanding of it and have to deal with it a lot. The thing that's been happening is on a pretty notorious road in my town. This road has had numerous murders and ghost sightings on it and is genuinely creepy at night. Not to mention that there's a horse ranch on it that the owners dropped like flies and their prize-winning horses mysteriously died on. My main interaction here lately happened right near this ranch. I was driving home from school, and I took night classes, so it was pretty dark. I drive a shitty old Taurus that has an issue every other week, but I'm poor, so any car is good. Anyways, I was driving and my car started to overheat and started acting up. The hiccuping was so bad I decided to pull over the next stop I can. This road is very curvy and there's only one straight way, right in front of the ranch. Go figure. I pulled off and called my girlfriend's uncle who works on cars, and he said he would be there in about 30 minutes. No big deal, I thought. I'll wait in the car. However, my car's heat was broken and it was colder here than outside, so I decided to wait on the hood of my car. I sat opposite the iron gate that was the entrance to the ranch. The entrance goes out into two small fields where they would showcase their horses. The last one to die was a celebrity named Duke. The fields end with a small forest and road going through to the main house. Ever since the first horse and person deaths came out, there were rumours that the place was haunted. They were, of course, natural, at least to some degree. The horses were slaughtered by a bear. Very doubtful, but that's what was said. I never stepped foot near that place before and wasn't planning on it. But as I sat down on the hood of my car browsing Reddit, I heard something in the field. When I shined my light to see what it was, my heart dropped. It looked like a pale, skinny dog, I guess. It looked wrong. I freaked out and got in my car and it seemed to run at me. I got in and looked and didn't see it. Of course, I'm not an idiot and decided not to tour and look at, but just to sit calmly in my car. I heard a growl somewhere near me and BTFO'd. I turned my car in and hightailed it out of there. I of course fucked my car up doing so, but as soon as I got out of the woods, I pulled over and waited. It's been about 4 days, and when I drive that road, I still see a pale shape in the dark, and it fills me with fear. A couple of other things have been happening too. My aunt has been taking a sharp turn and got very, very sick, and if my cousins are to be believed, it may be something very evil that did it. But that's a very different story that will be difficult to tell. So I'll save it for a different time. I live in a very religious place in the south, so a lot of people tend not to believe what they hear or see because it's just the devil playing tricks. That being said, my cousin D, who is about 12 years older than me, believes in this too. That what he saw was just a demon and not a skinwalker. Getting this story out of him took a while. He didn't like to talk about it, but I got him to open up about it a bit. This happened around the mid-90s. D, much like me and my cousins, spent his childhood around my mama's property with his brother, C, and his cousin, K. They would play manhunt and tag and such like we did. When this story took place, it was in the middle of the summer and he was around 12. He and C and K were playing at a treehouse that is no longer standing. They had just pulled a prank on K and were hiding from him in the treehouse. D and C stayed in the treehouse until K stopped looking. C left and went back into our mama's house and left D alone. D stayed up in the treehouse and read some comics. The treehouse was about half a mile from the house and was on a hill so that you could still see the house from it, but it was still in the woods. At the time, my papa was still alive but was in Georgia on a retreat, so he wasn't there, which let the three boys do whatever they wanted. Papa would holler for them to come in when it started to get dark because there was, and still is, a large number of coyotes and bears around the house. Dee decided to read comics all day, something he still enjoys, and eventually fell asleep. He woke up and it was dusk. He heard our mama yelling for him and he began to get ready to leave. As he went down the ladder, he heard a coyote yip and he climbed back up. At this point, he began to get a little upset while telling me the story. He began to explain that the coyote looked like, and I realised it was the same one that me and my cousins had been seeing growing up as well. It looked like it had mange. It had a large tuft of fur missing on its right side, and you could see the bare pale skin and it had human-like eyes. It snarled at him and bore its teeth. He was taken aback by this and he just sat back down in the treehouse. The coyote sat at the base of the ladder and just looked up at him. He told me he sat there for about 20 minutes trying to figure out what to do. He remembered he had a slingshot and decided that the best course of action would be to try to scare it off with that. He said he shot at it and it just growled more. My cousin was and still is a very good shot with a slingshot. I had a couple of bruises to prove it. He reared back and decided to aim at its eye because he didn't like the way it stared at him. He reared back and got it right in its left eye and it ran away howling. He got a little more emotional now. He told me he climbed down the ladder and made a mad dash toward the house. About halfway to the house, there's a large dip in the land where there were a bunch of bushes and small trees. When he was about there, he told me that he heard coyote yips all around him and swore that a whole pack had come upon him. He just ran from it, and while he was on his way up the other side of the dip, he tripped and hurt his leg. He started to get upset and had to stop a few times. He told me he got up and started to limp toward the house. This is the part that gave me chills. He told me that he turned and looked behind him and saw not a coyote anymore, but a person. And it looked like it had his face. He said it started to walk towards him in an odd way, but luckily C and K started yelling for him, and as quickly as it appeared, it disappeared. D told C and K, but they didn't believe him, and they told him it was just a trick of the night, something that he still tries to believe in. As soon as he told me this, he kindly asked me not to ask him about it anymore, as when he thinks about it, he thinks he sees that coyote outside. D is a very religious and reliable man, so when he says weird stuff is happening, I usually believe him. The coyote he saw that night, me and my cousins have seen before as well, along with a stag. Since the night me and my cousins saw it, I have had 2 more encounters, the latest one being last year. I'll share those in time. One of my cousins who was there with me that night may tell his perception of the events too. I have some more stories that happen more in the park than on family land that I'm going to share soon. Several of my friends have had creepy experiences as well, and if they're willing, I may share theirs as well. My dad likes to take me on little off-road rides in his Jeep. It wasn't necessarily an off-road one either. It was a Cherokee, so it wasn't really built for backwoods dirt trails. He decided to do this one that was out in the park with me and told me you'd be fun and we could go check out ruins of an old building, and then we decided to go. We were about a good hour into the park. There was one of those official vehicle-only gates on this dirt road, and usually that would stop people, but my dad just decided to break the lock and push it open anyways. My father was ever the best at listening to rules. About 30 minutes into our drive on this road, he's shining a flashlight out the windows, trying to find this building, and has his headlights on full, and we're both just looking for any signs of anything. Eventually, we came upon this really steep hill. He says, "Oh, I think I remember this," and just guns it up the hill. Naturally, we get stuck at a certain angle where we can't reverse or accelerate. My dad never likes to admit he's wrong, and said he can fix it and started tinkering with it. I was very curious, and still am, so I got the flashlight and I started looking in the woods around us, really kind of just worried for bears or wolves. I noticed a little light in the valley below us, and turned off the flashlight to see it. While my dad was cursing at our car, I decided to get a little closer to the light and see if I could figure out what it was, mainly to see if it was somebody who could help us. As I got closer to it, the trees took it apart a little, and it was a very small town. The best way I can describe it is like that town from the movie Big Fish, just a very numbered set of small buildings. As I got closer, I heard voices and saw people. But something just seemed weird about it, like they weren't really there. I decided to try to get closer to the town, but the closer I got, the weirder I got. I eventually felt like if I didn't turn around, I would never come back, which is a very odd feeling to have, and decided to just go back up to my dad. He didn't get the car unstuck, by himself at least, and we just slept in the car. The next morning, a park ranger showed up, and after a very lengthy talk with my dad and very hefty tickets, he helped us get the car unstuck, and we were on our way. Before we left, I tried to catch another glimpse at the village, and it was the ruins my dad was talking about. I talked to the park ranger about it, and all he said was it was once a thriving village that was just lost in time. I decided not to say anything about what I saw to the ranger, and did tell my dad about this unusual skepticism, turned me away from bringing up any more. I have since visited that same village, and it's a really pretty place. I told my friend about what I saw, and I believed me for the most part, and we decided to stay one night around the woods and try to see if anything happened. And of course, nothing did. But I still remember that night as if it was yesterday, and still get goosebumps from the feeling I had visiting it. So I've been renting a room in a one-story house for the last couple of years. There had been a lot of strange things that would occur over the months within the house, although I did wonder whether to tell my Chinese landlord about it or not. I assumed she already knew, as there had been prayer bells playing on repeat on radios within the house and the garage. Each one mysteriously disappears on occasion. At first, I thought it had just been my roommates becoming annoyed with the constant bells and prayers, until I lived in the house alone, and things would mysteriously go missing. My boyfriend at the time returned to Taiwan for a little while. I promised him I'd keep the room for when he returned. During some of the months, I would be the only tenant in the house. All of the rooms became empty as time went on, only to be filled by new tenants. The house became a revolving door. I would at times hear a little girl crying in the middle of the night. I'd smell cigar smoke when I was the only person in the home. I chalked that up as it was just wafting in from the outside somewhere. But at times it was strange, unexplainable even. I would sometimes feel heat upon my face, hot almost like a flame, only moments later to smell that familiar strong cigar smoke. When I wasn't alone in the house, on occasion I would hear a tenant yelling on their cell phone with the landlord on the other line. It would usually have something to do with not being told that the house was haunted. Once again, I figured that she already knew. Eventually, I wanted to record my experiences in the house. Whenever I'd hear the girl crying, I would try to record it. Footsteps in the house, and I'd open my bedroom door into the dark corridor, trying to capture at least something unexplainable that I've seen, so I could gather proof. There had been plenty of times when I opened my door to see a pale, ghostly floating face, a Caucasian man in his mid to early 20s, and only his face staring back at me from the dark. I had no Caucasian roommates, let alone any roommates without bodies and just floating faces. Yet, when I would lift my phone to record, my phone would shut off, as if it had no battery. There had been times when I did record or take a photo, only for the photo to appear distorted, or not even be in the gallery at all. It was tricky trying to catch them, but eventually I did. I felt quite alone in the city, to be honest. I'd wake up and go to work, and come back home to watch TV or Netflix. Some nights I'd hear my dad's voice or my sister's voice coming from the hallway, despite the fact that they lived in different states than I did. It would say to let them inside. It would happen so often that I grew to ignore it by putting my headset on and listening to music. My cousin moved in one day. My family wanted him to come help keep me safe. He often had a lot of things happen to him in the house. Things would be thrown at him. He'd wake up with scratches and burns. While I was in the shower, at times I'd hear a woman whisper in my ear, "Don't trust him." I'd turn and no one would be there. I thought I was just sleepy, and I tried to explain it off as maybe someone talking outside, and it just felt like it was right up to my ear. Whatever I could do to explain it. Later on, he proved to me that he was one of the most dangerous people in the city. Although at first I didn't understand why he was always attacked in the house, I guess the ghosts had been right. I made him leave. I was once again just trying to survive on my own in the city, waiting for Mark to come back. I would often try to stay out of the house. I would go out with friends to distract myself. Boba, food, gaming, whatever I could to just not think about waiting or the house. I made some friends in the city, some new friends. They seemed nice at first, until I realised it was simply a facade. Most people are nice, and I often try to see the good in people, but given I was a female alone in the city, I should have been more careful. This part of the story ties into the current goings-on within the house. As the months went on, I bought a spirit box. I would ask questions and they would answer. One time I asked, "Where is Mark?" just to see if they knew, and they responded accurately with his squad. I would talk to them like I would with normal people. I respected them, and in some way it made me feel less alone until I turned it off. Still being careful about it, and for months I wouldn't talk to them. Things in the room would move around in front of me on their own, knocking on my door in the middle of the night. But still, I just tried to move on from it, and I acted like the house was just like every other house. Mark told me not to talk to the spirits, given an experience we had in an apartment a few years ago. My family and his family say that I have a gift, just like my mum and dad, but I never really knew my mom. I would often come home, and if something bad happened that day, it was like they already knew. Things in the room would be thrown, the lights would turn off on their own. Sometimes I would go through my room trying to find something. I'd lay on the bed and just close my eyes, giving up on trying to find it, and I'd feel a pressure on my stomach, as if something fell on me from the ceiling, only to look down and whatever I was looking for was right there. It happened quite often. One day, I just laid in bed thinking. The overhead light in the room turned off, and I was laying in the pitch black room, only my solar panel lights remaining on. I picked up my phone and started to record. I asked them, "Are you there?" And the light turned on in the closet and then back off. I began to ask them about my new friends, and it was like they already knew. The light would turn on for yes and remain off for no. In the end, I asked them, "Do we get along?" And the light turned on. It remained on for the rest of the night. When I went back to this old recording of the lights, I went ahead and checked if I captured any EVPs that day. I did. I captured the children. I also captured one saying, "He will pay," and another one saying something along the lines of, "Take him to hell." At the time of the recording, I didn't check for EVPs within it until after the friendship had ended. I was quite upset with those new friends for a little while. At one point after hearing the EVPs, I recalled one of them talking about a shadow that they've only seen recently in their home. I put two and two together. The fact that my home had a shadow in it as well, and that they've only just seen it after they had made their criminal mistake. I hated them so much. When Mark returned, he and the landlord took me to a temple after the landlord said she saw a black fog in my room. I explained some of the spirits I had seen and described them to them. The landlord confirmed that she knew the house was haunted. We went to the temple to meet with a monk she trusted. Although he didn't know what we discussed, he had described the spirits in the same way I described them to her. Mark and my landlord looked over at me, their eyes wide after receiving confirmation. The ghosts, a man who was hung, a little girl, a little boy, a young man who died in a car accident, a tall shadow, a weeping woman in a white dress. He confirmed it all. Then, the landlord asked them to remove the spirits from the home. They later came to the home, and although I am sad they may be gone, I'm happy they're able to be free if they had a choice to be. I think the little girl and the boy are still here with the shadow and the young man. I can still hear her crying at night sometimes. The monk later told the landlord they won't leave until she does. He also told her that I am close to the spirit world and removing me could anger them in her house. The importance of that is that my landlord's son had a crush on me and wanted to have a relationship with me, but I was still waiting for the mark. He got upset and tried to threaten to kick me out for not giving him a chance. So it's nice in that way, that even in death and being unseen, that they're still protecting me. Just a random tenant in a random room in their home. And so here I am, still in this room. And nothing bad has happened to Mark or I. It's just nice knowing we're not entirely alone, no matter how alone we may feel. So I had shut it off, so I could live a normal life again without seeing them. But my cousin, who has no abilities, has seen them in the house. At first, when he moved in, he didn't know that it was haunted. I didn't want to tell him that the house was haunted because I thought, well, maybe it's not. And if I told him, he would believe it was and that would influence him in some way. If it was haunted, I was going to let him find out on his own. Or if it didn't bother him, then I'd let it be. As the weeks passed and things moved in front of our eyes, he started to hear his family members calling his name from time to time in the middle of the night. Same experience that I had. He would have a nightmare sometimes of something trying to come inside of the room, yet it was stuck on the other side of the door and was unable to come inside, beckoning him to open the door. Which is odd because I actually have a video of it doing that and it is heard faintly. When I lived alone, it would occur very frequently, but instead of in dreams, it was literally in real life and happening on camera. I didn't show him the video beforehand, so he couldn't have known. Eventually, I did open up to him about it being haunted, but that it's not really a big deal or anything, since my family usually ends up in haunted houses for some odd reason. That if we make excuses and such, the activity will remain low. For instance, if something slides across the floor in front of us, we just make an excuse, no matter how stupid that excuse is, and we say it out loud and shrug it off. Sometimes it happens again after that, but we do make another excuse and then it stops. If something pounds on our walls from all directions, usually it happens for a few seconds, we just make another excuse, etc. Then life goes on like normal. My cousin would also be laying in bed at night, and he explained that he would see one of the almost rippling. I thought it must be an eyesight issue, so I asked him to show me where it was. Oddly enough, it was the same wall that I had a nightmare about months ago, involving things trying to climb out of a black tar-like door, with nearly 100 arms covered in the tar. So yeah, that was odd, and he didn't have the experience again. Anyway, in the room one day when I was living there on my own, I had seen a woman. Pretty much the generic ghost look. Most of them don't seem to look like that, but in movies they do. It was just a young woman who floated through my bedroom door and then through the wall beside it. Nearly entirely see-through from the waist down, and she looked as if she was made of mist or fog. No colour at all, and also in a very old, almost wedding gown type of dress. Also in the room, I would often see glowing white circular orbs, like things that would float and leave. Almost like a flicker, but I thought that was just, I don't know, a headache or whatever. But it was always in one spot of the room. Well, my cousin saw it too. In the same spot I usually would see it in. And then I told him it happened sometimes. He's gotten used to the house, and most of the activity stopped happening after I shut it off. I also bought a little spirit box and would use it outside whenever the activity would go up. And soon after, I went back inside, life was back to normal, and the activity would subside for another month or two. Before the spirit box, the activity was nearly unlivable. Dangerous almost. Afterwards now, it's extremely silent, like we have a home now. If anything, it's just a house that's haunted. By a house nonetheless. With all of the haunted houses my family and I had lived in, my only advice is not to let a haunting consume you. There was an incident while I was at work a few months ago. I worked in the airlines. A passenger handed me their tickets and I looked up at them and they smiled. While they smiled, a voice said, "The marriage is fake." There was a woman behind him and I asked, "Oh, is this your wife?" He replied, "Yes, we are going on our honeymoon." A voice then said, "Stop him." I made small talk and a minute or two later, 3 police officers showed up. I heard over the radio they said a name. I looked at the tickets, and on the tickets was the name they needed. I asked the man to step aside with his wife for a moment. I spoke with the police officers and later found out he was a felon who faked his marriage. There was another incident while I was at work back around the end of November to the beginning of December. There was a passenger who in some way managed to bring 7 backpacks with him. As I checked his ticket number, he hadn't paid for the extra bags. My manager went up to him and let him know he had to pay for the extra bags. Each bag would cost an additional $130, with the extra weight and fee within the charge. At first he tried to gain sympathy by saying he was studying to become a doctor. He later changed his story and said he worked and studied in a lab, and that within the bags were his book and some lab equipment. As he repacked his bags, for security reasons I had to watch him do this. Before he opened them, he looked up at me, paused, and then opened his bags while keeping eye contact with me. Each bag was full of peanuts. Opened containers of peanuts with no seal, which meant they were open prior to boarding. I spoke with management about this, yet for some reason they really wanted this man on board. I went back and he repacked his bags. He said he was able to pay for 5 of them, but not the 6th. He repacked enough where he didn't need the 7th bag. I returned to management to discuss it, and as we spoke, he attempted to give his bags to the other passengers, not allowed in any airport, immediate deboarding and delay of the flight, as well as a fine and near felony charges. I returned to the passenger and reminded him not to do this. I returned his bags to him via the security footage. I asked him for his passport, and when I held it in my hands, I saw a vial, a shot, a virus, lungs, the world map and hospital beds. I heard the sound of coughing. When it was done, I noticed I was looking into his eyes, and he said in a frantic whisper, "Help me." His eyes wide, and his voice shook. I went back to management, ready to call security, and they didn't allow me to. For whatever reason, I hadn't seen them, so inclined to make sure someone was on the plane. They boarded the passenger. That was back in November to possibly the very beginning of December. Afterwards, our entire crew, except for about 2 people, became seriously ill. Afterwards, myself and the team had been moved to other airlines as the news of COVID affected many airlines, until eventually they had been postponed in the area until further notice. As I was working in the other airline, I was checking in a passenger and asking the usual questions with the usual small talk. They later told me they were afraid the flight was going to be delayed. I asked, "Oh, I am sorry. Was it because of the volcano?" They looked at me and said, "No, it's just because sometimes flights are delayed." I said, "The volcano on the island?" We laughed and I handed them the tickets. I later turned to my coworker and asked, "Wasn't there news of a volcano eruption?" He turned to me and said, "No, not that I've heard of." We checked the news and I looked up the island and yet no news came out. I could have sworn it happened. I knew the name, the island, and yet the news hadn't come out or it didn't happen yet. A few days later, one of our flights had been delayed because of a volcanic eruption on a nearby island. The same island I had typed in the search and remembered. I'd seen in the news when truly it hadn't even happened at that time. There was a passenger who seemed very anxious due to the events of COVID at the time. I tried to comfort him as he was elderly and was planning to go on a cruise ship, and he was excited about it, but also slightly nervous because his daughter tried to beg him not to go on the ship. He pulled out his phone and showed me the ship. A voice said, "A stranded ship." I took a breath and told him about some good hotels in the city he was flying to, and also nearby cities and beach towns. He was thankful. Again, about a week later, news came in that the ship had in fact become stranded due to COVID-19 complications within. I hope he took up the hotel options, but I couldn't push it because of my job duties. There was another incident, which was of the last. On the last flight we had, I was called as well as the entire team. While we were there checking tickets and enforcing social distancing, I cannot explain it well to those who had not had it happen. As I walked to the gate and through the passengers to check tickets, and to ask if they had any questions. I was shown through my eyes a number of them were sick without symptoms yet. No one knew at the time, but for some reason I was shown this. I was also shown my co-worker would become sick. I had asked and was given permission to return home. I had gone home 40 minutes early that day as the large number of us had not been needed for that flight. News came out that those 2 passengers I was shown in real-time vision were removed from the flight when they didn't pass the 3rd phase of protocol. News also came out that the co-worker had fallen ill a little while after the flight. She was one of my co-workers who previously hadn't fallen ill in November or December. It was a sunny day outside when my dad and his 3 brothers went to visit their grandfather. His house had a small apple orchard in the backyard. You could still see the apple trees to this day. Although the last time and the first time I had seen his grandpa's house, the trees were dead and twisted. My dad and his brothers sat at a small table in the kitchen, while their parents spoke with the other adults in the living room. They were clicking away at viewfinders, holding the viewfinder up to the light emitted from the kitchen window. Their grandfather came into the kitchen and asked, "Would you kids like some apples?" My dad enthusiastically said yes, along with his brothers. The apples were always fresh and delicious. Their grandfather opened the basement door, which was located in the kitchen. The door closed behind him, and they could hear his footsteps walking down the stairs. They continued to click away at their viewfinders. Eventually, one of the brothers noticed that it had been a while since their grandfather went down into the basement, about 30 minutes ago. They decided to go down and make sure everything was alright. My dad walked over to the basement door and opened it. He took 1 step down past the door. As his foot hit the first step, he heard a roaring, deep laughter. My dad called out to his grandpa, and he could hear his grandpa's voice say, "Let me go, let me go." My dad rushed down the stairs, and on the wall were 2 high-definition shadows cast upon it. My dad's youngest brother followed him down the stairs and stood on them, holding the railing and watching the wall and the shadows almost as if in shock. My dad yelled, "Grandpa!" My dad, believing it was a prank, looked around the basement. There was a white sheet which was hanging up down there. He was sure that behind it, he would find out what was making the shadows on the wall. He lifted the sheet, but nothing was there. He looked down, and there was a crate of apples lying on the floor. My dad turned around and walked up to the shadows that were cast on the wall. The largest shadows the entire size didn't fit on the wall. My dad says that the size of the shadow would have made it at least 2 to 3 stories tall. As he looked closer at the shadow, he could see each long individual strand of stringy hair that hung on its arms. Its body was thin, almost like the body of someone who you would have seen in the pictures of Auschwitz, while also with defined thin muscles in its arms. Its head had huge horns leading backwards, and the head was that of a goat. It held the shadow of his grandfather in its hands, holding him at his waist and shaking him while laughing. His grandfather beat at its arms, screaming to let it go, while it shook him like a doll and laughed. My dad's youngest brother yelled, "Let my grandpa go! Let my grandpa go!" The shadow seemed to be completely unaware of them being there. My dad and his brother went back upstairs to get help. His 2 older brothers, who were too afraid to go downstairs because of the sheer sound of laughing, followed them into the living room. This was during the time when kids should be out and seen but not heard. Everything that they said was ignored as kids, trying to get attention or their imagination. They went back into the kitchen and sat silently, not knowing what to do. Thump, thump, thump. They could hear footsteps coming up the stairs from the basement. My dad prepared himself to see the true form of the shadow before them. The door opened, and it was their grandfather. He held a crate of apples in his hands. My dad ran up to him and lifted his shirt to check his waist and stomach. He asked him, "Grandpa, are you burned? Are you burned?" His grandpa looked down at him and laughed and said, "Why would I be burned?" My dad looked up and said, "Grandpa, you were in hell." Later on, the grandpa shared his experience when he was in the basement. He went downstairs to grab an apple crate. He thought he heard my dad's voice clearly yell Grandpa, so he turned around for a moment to see if he was there with them. No one was there. He was a bit spooked, and so he started to walk up the stairs. That's when he heard, "Let my grandpa go." This really spooked him, so he tried to quickly go back upstairs. He believed he was down there for only a couple of minutes. When he met my dad and his brothers upstairs, they were a certain look on their face. My dad ran up to him and lifted his shirt and asked if he was burned. Later on, when he became very ill, he told my dad that he was worried what was going to happen to him when he died. For a while, his life story was kept in the dark room from many family members. In fact, his life was so secretive that some family members believed he was part of the mafia in the past. When I found out what he had done at times in his life, I found out why it was kept a secret. I have 3 younger sisters, and all of them get spooked very easily. We have had a lot of unexplainable experiences, such as I had the room that had a window that faced the walkway up to my house. I would often hear noises like people talking outside my window when my parents and siblings were asleep, but I brushed it off as the outside cats we have. One summer night, I had my bedroom window cracked open as my room tended to get extremely hot, and I heard something scratching at my window. I was freaked out, and my first instinct was to lay flat so whatever was outside my window wouldn't see me in my bed. I laid flat for what felt like 30 minutes, but was probably only 1 or 2 minutes. When I finally got the courage to look, it was just one of the outside cats. So I hopped out of bed to shoo her away and shut the window. About a year later, me and my sister switched bedrooms. At this point, the outside cat who scratched at the window's screen had passed away. One night, my sister comes running into my room very pale and says, "There's something scratching at my window." My first thought is, no, it's just the cat. But then I remembered she had passed. I got really freaked out and tell her that it's okay and not to worry about it. Just to come sit with me for a bit, and it was probably just the videos she's always watching getting to her head. After a while, I told her I'll go check it out because at this point it was late and I really wanted to go to bed, and figured maybe it was just a windy night and she was getting freaked herself out for no reason. I went to go stand in her room, and had I hear or see nothing at the window, I stand there for a bit longer and still nothing. As I turn around, I hear the scratching. I froze. I turned around and looked